In what other ways is this section different from the first section? Besides the covert activities, the new era?
CIA?
The CIA.
Right here in America, just here in America.
What Nixon doesn't say is that Castillo Armas was handpicked by the CIA.
Throughout this period, there is a key figure in U.S. foreign policy that shapes our future. And he's John Foster Dulles. What was his role? What did he do?
At Fordham University Chapel, 36 are ordained as Jesuit priests. Prominent in the procession is Avery R. Dulles, son of the Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, who with Mrs. Dulles is present for the ordination ceremonies.
John Foster Dulles was proclaimed Christian, and his objective was to basically eradicate communism in his mind. And I believe that he really thought that he might have been doing that in what he did, but he was involved in all of the, pretty much all of the countries that we had covert actions in. He had a profound effect in his position in Washington. He also had a brother, Alan Dulles, that was also fraternizing with the Nazis in Berlin, and it wasn't until his company demanded that he close the office in Berlin that he finally did 3 years after he opened it. So we see him having a set idea, and I think that, and projected that to the American people. His fear of communism became our fear of communism.
It sounds like what you're trying to say is something about Kinser might be showing us that it's not what you know, it's who you know.
He belongs to a family who were politicians and lawyers, and he was kind of set up just to go into politics and rule the country.
As a child with his maternal grandfather and then his paternal grandfather with the missionary work and being a preacher, and then talking about his other grandfather who introduced him to all the different politicians and presidents in Washington.
He represented multinational corporations in America, and he was a very successful corporate lawyer. He was also a very religious man, like Julie has stated. He wanted to influence the rest of the world, but whoever he saw that went against American corporations or American businesses, he immediately classified them as anti-American, and they were involved in some sort of U.S. conspiracy. And he wanted to get rid of them at once.
So far as your government is concerned, you can be sure of two things. First, it will never start a war. But the second thing you can be sure of is that it will never be intimidated, subverted, or conquered.
Through John Foster Dulles, we see a clear connection between American business and the U.S. government that plays a role now in our foreign policy, even to this day. And that connection, it played through all the way to today. For instance, John Foster Dulles, he held shares, as well as he was a lawyer for companies such as ITT, who, when they had a problem, he was affiliated with them, and their loss of profit was his loss of profit. Money has cost lives in these foreign countries through our interventions.
Where does the media get their information? And how are they influenced by the government?
The public relations, they're paid, basically. Maybe not directly, like here's some money, go put some propaganda out there. But
does everybody understand how public relations works? Okay, public relations is where something like a company hires you as a public relations professional, and you represent the company to make it look good.
Also, Sigmund Freud's nephew, Bernays, was used in basically generating propaganda. The idea that the image of a country would be projected to America as a negative one. So that's how we start to see the media playing a large role in our perception of other countries.
Do you have a family survival plan? If not, start one now. There's a civil defense booklet filled with facts and tips to help you make preparations for any disaster.
You'll often find cases where a prominent American leader will come up with some story about how evil somebody is or what terrible things are going on in some foreign country. Then he leaks this story to some reporter. It then appears on the front page of your newspaper. And then when the leader is asked about it, he says, well, I'm not just saying this. It's right here in the newspaper. So it's actually a closed circle.
We get fed information, through the media with the newspaper, the worldly news, and television, internet, and things like that. And so we don't necessarily think as critically as we should.
Well, I don't think there's any design, but I do think that there are structures in our media, especially broadcast media, the news media, that compel us to encapsulate the news in such small portions that it does create a bigger problem than we might otherwise have.
Egypt celebrates Revolution Day, the 6th anniversary of the overthrow of King Farouk.
I think people are very, very influenced by the images portrayed of the Middle East and its population in the media.
We see in Iran with President Mossadegh, he had a 95 to 98% approval rate. But when he came in and wanted to nationalize British Petroleum, as we know as BP, the British couldn't exactly take out this overthrow for whatever reason, so they called on the Americans, which was pretty peculiar. But
nationalism, for example, in Iran, when the Anglo-Iranian oil company was going to be nationalized by Iran, the British were going to lose some money. So you could claim that that is communist because what you're doing is you're taking corporate money away from the corporation and spreading it around a little bit. So nationalism could easily be portrayed as communism by the press.
It's peculiar too, because right now what we're trying to do in the Middle East is we're trying to set up a democracy. And Iran was a democracy at that time. Can you imagine what would have happened if we just left it alone?
This, then, is the new man of Iran, a man who looks with hope to the time when, with further development of industry and her great natural resources, Iran may know again some of the glory it knew when Darius ruled at Persepolis over the mightiest empire the world had ever known.
The political system in the United States has veered quite far off the original popular democratic path that I think our founding fathers first envisioned. What this means is that the interests of the corporations and corporate groups that promote members of Congress, that contribute to their campaigns, become dominant.
The American people, the American citizens aren't making these decisions, but often enough our elected officials are not actually making the decisions or formulating the policies. They're just stamping the policies yes or no.
I'll tell you a story. I had a friend who was a journalist from Australia who was covering Washington for a couple of years. And he told me he was shocked to see the way Washington operates in ways that the democracy in his country would never tolerate. And the example he gave me was this. He said that there was a debate going on the floor of the Senate or the House on a bill that had to do with regulating pharmaceuticals. Now, the pharmaceutical industry, very powerful. They have more than one lobbyist for every member of Congress. And they pour millions of dollars into political campaigns. So there was a break in the debate. And one member of Congress goes back to his office, and then he huddles with the lobbyists for the pharmaceutical industry, and they hand him a few sentences that need to be inserted into this bill. And another card that has arguments for why these few sentences are really good for all Americans. So he then takes that out onto the floor of Congress and proposes this very obscure sentence, which actually can provide huge profits for the pharmaceutical industry, although many people may, on the outside, may not realize that. So my friend said to me, I don't believe this. You've got lobbyists sitting in the offices of members of Congress who they have essentially placed in office, people that are totally beholden to them, and then are telling them, go out and do our bidding on the floor of the House.
This takes us back to a more basic issue. How healthy is American democracy?
Most people just think the system doesn't really work that well, and that they don't really have any power in changing it.
I happen to believe that we are indeed undergoing a very cynical moment in history, particularly in the US, because we still say that we are the best democracy around, but in reality, that's far from truth.